Hi, and welcome to another Playmaker tutorial. In this one, I thought I would do kind of an introduction to Playmaker since I haven't done that yet. There's lots of great tutorials out there that you can find, but there's not really one that I've seen that really breaks down a lot of the key components of just getting Playmaker running and also navigating and utilizing Playmaker and some great tips and tricks. So we're going to start from the beginning and show you how to get started with Playmaker. So the first thing you need to do is you need to buy Playmaker. It is not a free tool. So you can just go to the Unity Asset Store. Also, depending on your version of Unity, you can also go to Window, Asset Store, and you can log in and install Playmaker. But sometimes I don't like using that because it's kind of slow. So I'll just go to Playmaker. And here it is. And right now, I think it's on sale right now. Yep, for $32.50. I think it's normally about 60 bucks, $65. Right now it's on sale. I'm not sure how much longer this sale is, so if you're watching this video, maybe it's still on sale for you, maybe not. So if you've been thinking about getting Playmaker but haven't pulled the trigger yet, now's the time right now. All right, so I already have Playmaker, so I should just be able to go into Unity, go to the Asset Store, and click on this button here to see My Assets. Oh, but I'm not signed in. All right, I'm signed in now, so I can just click on My Assets here. And it'd probably be useful if I maximize this window. And I'm just going to search for Playmaker. You know what? I need to search in My Assets, though. So, oh, too late, but there it is. And it should give me the install. Yep, import. So it's already found it downloaded on my computer. Normally you have to download it first, but it's already found it downloaded on my computer somewhere, and now it's going to import it. All right, so you just import the whole thing. All right, so once you're done importing, I think you still have to click this Install Playmaker button on this GUI that comes up. All right, so I go ahead and click on Install Playmaker. I don't need to do a check for update issues or anything like that because this is an empty project I'm in. And I'm going to go ahead and install. And it's saying, hey, one more time, this could ruin your project possibly, although I've never had any issues. But I made it back up. Go ahead. Right now, I'm sticking with the long-term support version of Unity that's 2019.4.4 F1. So I'm sticking with that one for a good long while now, I think, so that I won't have any issues with Playmaker and stuff. All right, so I probably didn't need to do that because as you can see, I'm just importing the assets again, but I always end up doing it twice, I think. Because I don't think the toolbar and everything shows up until you do. All right, so that took a good 2 or 3 minutes, but I cut the video. The next thing you might want to go ahead and do is do some add-ons. I mean, I'm going to go ahead and hide the asset store because I don't need that anymore. In fact, I'll just go ahead and close that. You can also, if you don't do the add-ons right away, you can go up to Playmaker, add-ons, and download add-ons. I'm just going to click this button here since it's here. And the only one that I'm always getting is the ecosystem browser. And what's great about the ecosystem browser is there's lots of extra actions that have been created either by the community or the developers themselves. They've thrown into the ecosystem. So it's not part of the main set because they're not very common actions. But occasionally you might be searching the normal actions in Playmaker and you can't find exactly what you're looking for. It's probably in the ecosystem browser. I like to go ahead and have it set up and installed when I get started. So what it does is it takes you to the Playmaker webpage, the Huton Games webpage, and it shows the download package for the ecosystem browser. So I'm going to go ahead and download that. All right, so weirdly, I had to right-click. Clicking on the link from their webpage wasn't downloading it. So I actually had to right-click on it and open it in a new tab. I'm not sure why. I already have it installed, but I'll go ahead and, or download it. I'll go ahead and download it again. It's just downloaded from a previous time. Oh, do I want to replace it? Nah, I'll just go load it. All right, found it, and I'm running it. And so it's going to import what's needed for the ecosystem. All right, so now that I have the ecosystem in, if I go up here to Playmaker, add-ons, I now have ecosystem browser. And so if in the normal actions panel, you don't see the action you need, come in here and search in the ecosystem. For example, I'll just search audio. All right. And there's audio fade in, audio fade out. I think there's even some Facebook ones in the ecosystem. Must be related to Facebook, but aren't specific there. But look for actions. If you can't find them in the ecosystem, maybe there's been some custom actions that people have made and they've actually put up on the Unity Asset Store. So let's take a look at that. If you go to the Unity Asset Store and you just search Playmaker, you'll find all sorts of extras that people have listed on the asset store. Some of them, in my opinion, aren't really worth it because it's something you could put together fairly easily yourself watching a tutorial. But if you're somebody who'd rather just have it in front of you and learn from it, then you can do that. Also, the price point on some of these, like there's already a zombie shooter prototype, and in the Playmaker Discord, somebody said this is actually a really nice asset here if you're looking to do a first-person shooter. This one's really intriguing to me, the parkour system. Looks like Mecha Games has put a lot of great assets for Playmaker up here. Maybe you want something specific. So let's search Playmaker Facebook. All right, there's Easy Mobile Pro that has like a lot of different integrations in it. I think that's the one that I have. I have some mobile tool that's got Playmaker stuff built into it. Here you can see there's a Playmaker Facebook. Here's a Facebook SDK action set for Playmaker. So do your research, read the reviews. If you can't figure out something on your own, a lot of times there's a great asset in the asset store that somebody has done for you. Another thing you may want to do starting out on a project, if you plan on having any user interface at all, you probably want to use Text Mesh Pro. Now, Unity has its own built-in user interface, UI stuff, but the text ain't great to work with. So almost everyone I know uses Text Mesh Pro. And I can't remember if it's added in the Unity window automatically or if Playmaker adds it, but you can come in here to Window, Text Mesh Pro, and then go ahead and import Text Mesh Pro Essential Resources. And the examples and extras is sometimes useful too. And there it all is, and you can import it. Now, Text Mesh, if you're just doing a 3D game, you're probably going to be good. But if you're going to be doing something that's flat and actually you want to use UI commands, like you're making a UI button and you want to set the UI text and you want it to be Text Mesh Pro, you need a different action. So normally there's an action called Set Text Mesh Pro Text, but that won't work if it's text that's part of a UI element. So there's one more thing that you might want to get, and that's on GitHub. And if we search Playmaker Text Mesh Pro, pretty sure we want this one. Even though this one's got a later date on it, we want the one by Jean Fabre. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing his name right. And then we want to go to, I think, just download the code like this. And we can just download zip. I'll put it in my downloads folder. And we'll go ahead and extract all. Go ahead and extract to my downloads folder. So what I want to move over into my current Playmaker folder is this Text Mesh Pro folder here. So I'm going to go ahead and find another browser window. And I'm going to go to my drive where my project file is. So I got my Unity projects, Playmaker tutorials, assets, and really I could put it anywhere in here. But I'm going to go ahead and put it in the Text Mesh Pro folder. And no, not that folder. I want to put it in the Playmaker folder. So what I want to do is I want to come into Playmaker, and I'm just going to grab the Text Mesh Pro into the Playmaker folder. All right, so now I have this Text Mesh Pro folder into the Playmaker folder. I'm probably going to get some errors. Nothing. All right. So the next thing I want to do is go to Playmaker Editor. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck Show at Startup. And I'm going to drop my Playmaker window down here at the bottom. All right, so let's show you some tips about the Playmaker Editor itself. So I'm going to go ahead and maximize this. It's a good idea to check out the preferences. All right, read through these slowly. There's lots of great preferences in here. So there's the general ones. But one thing I like to check out is go from general to graph view. And you can change your theme. So if we want to come over here and first we got to select a game object. So let's unmaximize. Let's just use our main camera and put an FSM on it. All right, so by default, this is what our FSMs look like. And I can add a finish transition, hold down the control key, click on it, drag it over, and it gives me this curved line to my next state. All right, but if we go into the preferences and we look at our graph view, right now it's on a flat theme. We can switch to default, and it looks a little bit different. I personally kind of like the flat theme. Oh, now I don't know. I kind of like the default too. But interesting, flat was set for default for me. Color scheme, you can do dark background, or we can do light background, or we can do default, which looks like default's light. And then how do you want it linked? You can do these, I don't know how to pronounce Bezier, but that's how I pronounce it, Bezier links. You can do circuit links, which have these nice hard angles, and you can do direct links. You can also color links with the state color. So let's say one way to organize your FSMs, because some FSMs I've had have a ton of actions in them, but if you watched my previous tutorial, some of my FSMs have just one state. So when you have multiple states, sometimes you want to organize them by setting the state a color. So like I can make this one red and maybe make this one green. All right, and one of the things it will do is you can tell it to color links with the state color. So if this is being linked to here, I can actually set this link color to red, and now it's red. Let's say I add another transition. I'm just going to pick a random one that's in the system, and I can make this link color purple. All right, now when I draw a line from here to here, I got a purple line. Makes it easier to see where all your links are going. Also, if you don't like seeing all the active lines, there's also a way to fade links not connected to current states. And when you check this box, and I have this state highlighted, only the links connecting to this state are going to be solid. The rest are going to be kind of faded out a bit, kind of help you break apart those more complicated FSMs, although most of the time your FSMs don't need to be very complicated. If you want to put a description in your FSM, which you've seen me do in a previous tutorial, put this is my description. Ignore the poor spelling and all that. If I go back to my preferences, and if I don't want that description to be seen, I can hide it. But I don't know why I don't want to do that. Comments in graph view. Are my comments on my states? I don't know what comments are. Now we can put a description on the state. And I'm typing too fast. I didn't type it right, but I'm just going to move on here. Go back to my preferences. Okay, that's the description on the states. That's what comments are. Oh, default new state name. That's kind of neat. Hero. What should we call it? Phillips state. All right, so if I make a new state, boom, Phillips state. You can make it by default. Have a different, rather than calling them state 1, state 2, state 3. Might be useful if English isn't your primary language and you want to make it a different language. That you could probably do that. And you can also use snap to grid on or off. It can kind of help your, everything just be a bit more organized. You line things up perfectly. I usually have the grid snap on. What are the preferences we got here? Error checking. I would always leave all these error checks on. It's really useful because if something's not working, it'll have an error right here. And you can click it and it'll show you like what game object, what FSM is missing something. A lot of times you have like, you're telling it to do something to an object, but you didn't actually tell it which object to do it to. So then it'll throw up an error and it won't let you build. All right, let's talk a bit about variables. So it's one thing to move things around, but you're going to have variables regardless of what game you make. It might be health, it might be points, but you're going to have variables stored. So you have this variables tab. Okay, and there's many different variable types. I'm not going to cover them all today, but you can just look online just do a Google search about what each variable is. But like a float is a number with a decimal point. An integer is a number without one. Bool is just true or false. Game object is an object from your hierarchy or a prefab. A string is text, like words. All right, and there's many, 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 many more. One thing you can do, and you might be tempted to do, is if you have a variable, you can make it what's called a global variable. And it'll be very tempting because when you make a variable global, all your game objects and FSMs can access it. But you don't necessarily want that. Global variables, they're not bad, but they should be avoided if possible. So if that's the case, like let's say here in this cube integer, if I need to access from my camera that cube integer, how do I get it if it's not a global variable? All right, well, you can use some FSM, some actions for that. So if I double click here in my main camera FSM, I can say get FSM, and you can see all the different variables you can get from another FSM. So I can get an FSM's integer. All right, so I can drop that in here, or you can double click it, and you say where I'm getting it from, which you may have already stored the object you're getting it from as a variable, which is very, very useful. But maybe you didn't store it as a variable, so you can just drag it from your hierarchy, put it there. If you drag it from your hierarchy, it's going to give you all the different FSMs that are available. So if I go into cube and I call this FSM cubes FSM, and I go back to the state I was working on, notice I have 2 errors right now because I haven't completed this action. You'll see it's called cubes FSM. So that's why it's important to name your FSMs. It'll save you some time. And what's the variable we want? So if I click this ellipses, we can see all the variables that are in this FSM, and it's just an integer. And so now I need to store that as a variable, and I'm just going to store it as integer in this case. All right. So now I'm able to receive this variable from the cube. So so I can just say I'm not using the integer anywhere. It's just part of the cube. Let's just go ahead and give it a value of 3. So now if I come over here and I keep an eye on this action, or I could keep an eye on these variables, or I can even go to FSM debug. Oh, there's the show state labels. You were trying to find that earlier. I can go into my variables and I can say that I want this to show up in the inspector. So now if I come over here, I can see in the controls tab, there's that integer. All right, so we'll see it update here. We'll see it update in the actual state itself, and we'll also see it over here. So let's just hit play and see what happens. So remember, the cube already knows that it's a 3, and now you can see that when this main camera started, it went to the cube's FSM, looked for the integer variable, and stored it into a new integer variable on the main camera. And we can also see it over here in the inspector. Now, you don't have to do that, but it might be useful for you to see it over here. I don't like it so much because developers who use scripting and not Playmaker, they use this type of thing all the time, and it's a nice way to stay organized and see what's happening. But one of the drawbacks of Playmaker is all this extra stuff that's always over here. I guess you can collapse it, but things don't always stay collapsed when you have them collapsed, I've found. And then a lot of times all these other things are always expanded, and you never know when they expand themselves again because Unity just does what it wants sometimes. But yeah, I mean, if I had multiple integers, multiple objects or variables I want to keep an eye on over here in the inspector, I could do that by, in the variables tab, checking the box for inspector. You can also store variables in different categories. So we call these, if I want to put this in a folder called cube variables, I now have a new variable list here. All right, and maybe I want a new variable, a new int, and I want this to be camera int. And then I want to put this in camera variables. I honestly don't organize my variables that much, but if you're going to be pulling data from, or pulling variables from different game objects, then organizing them into categories like this are going to be very useful. What does tooltip do? I can't remember. I think if you highlight it, it tells you this is an int made on the camera, not pulled somewhere else. I don't know that it actually does anything. Okay, yeah, so if you hover over it, it pulls up there. And you can also just see it down here. But if you're just, you have to click on it. Okay, there you go. So you don't have to click on it, you can just hover over it and see, what was this variable again? So one great tip is anywhere you can put notes on what something is and does, put notes on it on what something is and does. Because you never know when you're going on vacation or you're not going to be able to work on your project and you're not going to remember what something does and where it's getting its information from. So learn from my mistakes and try to put information in to describe things. Name your FSMs, name your states, give them descriptions. It's going to make a world of difference. You'll notice that if you buy some Playmaker assets from the Unity Asset Store, a lot of those developers do a really good job of, like in their sample scenes, they'll actually put descriptions of stuff so you know what they're doing and how to modify them. All right, so one more thing. Let's talk about events. So events can be triggered in a state, but sometimes they can get sent from another object. So let's say we want to do something once this cube gets to its final state, but we want it to happen on the main camera. So what we can do is we can create an event that's called cube finishes. But in order for another game object to send an event to another game object, we have to make the event global. So that's what this column here means, is it's a global event. It tells you created a global event. You can go see it in globals. You can copy and paste them between projects. I haven't found a reason to really do that yet, but one day I'm sure I will. So now that I have this cube finishes as a global event, rather than have a transition to state 2, I'm just going to add a global transition, and now it's here in my global transitions list, cube finishes. All right, and it's also a good idea. Cube finishes, I think you can put these in categories too. Let's uncheck that. If I come into cube finishes, is it /cube? No. Yeah, there we go. So if you give it a name like this, cube finishes /cube, the first one's going to be the category. So if you have a bunch of different global transitions, you can have different categories. But in this case, I'm going to go back and I'm just going to call it cube finishes. It was interesting that I had to make it not a global in order to rename it. All right, enter. Let's make it global again. Cube finishes. Now it's just listed by itself. All right, so now if I come to the cube, I go into last state and I can do send event. And I can choose the target I want to send it to. If you choose game object, it's going to send it to every FSM on that game object, which sometimes you want to do. But when you can, do things very specifically, because the broader you do something, the more likely it's going to trigger things that you don't want to trigger. And it's also, I think, going to take a performance hit, if I'm not mistaken, because it's got to run that event multiple times. So I'm just going to go to send events game objects FSM. I'm going to choose my game object, which is my camera, and then choose the FSM, which it's only got one. And what event? Well, it's only got cube finishes as an option, and so it'll send that event. So now if we come back over here to main camera, we watch, it's going to start in state 1. Let's delete this finish transition, and we don't need that. So as you can see, there's no way to go from state 1 to state 2. A lot of times this will be an empty state. A lot of times this first state's not needed. And so you'll see people who will just label it as an init, like an initialization state, where it doesn't do anything. But sometimes you will set up something for the game object there. A lot of times what you'll even do is you'll just say, what's it called? Self? There's destroy self. Get self, game object, owner. Okay, a lot of times you'll just get owner because you want to store, maybe you want to store this game object as a variable. So this is main camera. So you might want to initialize it by storing itself into a variable. This is very useful for prefabs. So like if I was going to be making a prefab that I wasn't going to have in my scene at the beginning of the scene, but then create it into the scene later, in that prefab, during once of initialization state, I'm going to want it to set itself as a variable so that it can be used later on. But let's just go ahead and see what happens here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit start, hit play. And we're waiting, we're waiting, we're waiting, we're waiting. Oh, shoot, wait a minute. I think I set the wait time for 100 seconds, didn't I? Yeah. So let's make that 3. And just to make good habits, wait for 3 seconds. I'll name this so I know what's going on. So if I collapse it, I know what it is. Go back to the main camera, press play. Come on, cube, finish. And it finished. All right. So we can see that the cube finished. We went from this initialization state to state 2, thanks to this global event. All right. So hopefully this tutorial wasn't too long, but I really wanted to cram in as many tips and tricks in there. If it's over 10 minutes, I'm sorry, I'll separate it into 2 videos so that you don't get bored to tears. But I hope you enjoyed this introduction to Playmaker and showed you some tips and tricks that I wish I had known when I first started out. More Playmaker tutorials are to come to show you how to do various different things, but I think this will give you a good head start in knowing what you're doing. Stay tuned for more videos. Oh, and don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Thanks.